here. We're waiting for 1 more minute before we get started. I'm actually used to being in sessions that are not this quiet. I'm used to being in sessions where everyone just dials in and starts talking. So
Yeah, we'll give it another minute. I think we can get started.
oh, yeah, sure. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Olamide Amosu, and I'm joined by Anuja. Before we get to our introductions, I want to set the stage around the conversation today and how and why we put it together, actually. We're having this conversation around GTM and marketing for AI founders. And why this really matters at this point in time is because there are so many AI products in the market, and AI is allowing everyone, and including founders and enterprise, to be able to launch products faster. And where we've seen the very big gap, and I've written about it, and that's also how Anuja and I got to collaborate on this post, is that we've seen a lot of AI products go into the markets and they're skipping key steps that are very important for your go to market, which is where the go to market piece comes in. And we see that as a fundamental piece that should not be missed. So, as you think about your foundation for launching a product, either an AI product or an AI non AI product, know that you are competing in a very big market now, and you need to be very specific because AI can help you accelerate the product launch and also ship a lot of features, but it doesn't take away the foundations of what you need to do for your go to market. An important data that I got from Product Hunt is that an average of 1,000 AI products are being launched every day. And this has never been done, right? They've never been done. Previously, they used to have 300, and the past 2 years, it's been like 500. But this year, they're actually seeing 8,000. And that's crazy. It's very, very crazy. But what they are also seeing is that there is a lot more competition with AI products being launched from that perspective. If more people are going on product hunts to review their products. So, what this means is that a lot of founders are struggling to get their first users because they didn't walk the way the GTM process should work for AI products. So, to really get started, I'm going to start by introducing myself. My name is Olamide Amosu. I run Unusual Strategist, a publication on Substack. I help founders, a lot of founders, with their go to market strategy. And the past year, I've helped a lot of AI founders as well to design what their go to market strategy process is. And I've been sharing this on Substack. I'm going to hand over to Anuja to do her introduction.
Yeah, thank you, Almidi. Well, hi everyone. My name is Anuja. So I'm a marketer by background. I've spent 10 plus years at the intersection of content, digital, and product across small, scrappy startups as well as mid to large size companies. And currently, I am building AI marketing stack. So essentially, AI marketing stack is a Substack publication, but it's also a community of entrepreneurs, marketers, operators who are trying to build sustainable marketing systems using AI so that we can all do more with less and are not starting from scratch every time that we build a marketing campaign or a content engine. So that's what AI marketing stack is. And I'm super excited about this conversation today, genuinely, because I think we are living in very interesting times right now where the lines between the developer and the non-developer have historically blurred. And that also means that we are shipping a lot of products, a lot of apps using AI much faster, right? To your point, Olamide, about the product hunt stat that you shared, I can totally imagine that, how much is being done at a very fast pace. And that's what makes this topic about GTM and marketing coming together and not as separate entities, which happens a lot of times, but really embedded into each other to sort of find the right audience, your reach the right customer, and how you kind of like communicate your value to that customer, in the best possible way. So that's what we are going to be digging into today. We will start off a little bit about sharing our observations and learnings that we are seeing in the industry as we both work with founders based on our corporate experiences as well. So, one of the challenges that I definitely want to just dig into today is this disconnect between marketing and GTM. Um, in organizations, or if you're a startup, there's a lot of the times there's this disconnect, and what we've observed is this disconnect can oftentimes lead to a wasted budget, because you are sort of like reaching out or targeting a completely different audience than what your GTM has really validated for. And that sort of like leads to also a very mixed messaging that you end up communicating to your customer. So they are hearing something very different in a sales pitch versus what they're seeing in your ads or your website copy. And so that is like some of the challenges that I have observed in my work as I've worked with uh, founders. And one example that I do want to share here is, like, I was working with a edtech startup last year, and there was a market category disconnect between how they wanted to position themselves, but also there was that sort of like stemmed into their messaging, how they were communicating their value prop. So their customer wouldn't know, like, if they were really a language learning platform, or if they were really something more bigger as a test taking standardized testing platform. And I think all of that really just stems down from that disconnect that happens. So I think on that note, I think one of the things that I wanted to kind of like bring up here while we're on the piece of messaging, Alamedi, to you is, if you have observed founders um, sort of like being disconnected from their customers' actual pain points, and frustrations, or the outcome that they're trying to achieve, and being very embedded in like what they are building, and sort of like seeing that disconnect in the value that they are communicating.
Yes, thank you so much, Anuja. And I think it's very interesting in how you phrase the ed tech example, because one of the reasons why we connected was because I wrote a post about this, and how I had a client that was very similar to yours, who was also an ed tech founder, and I worked with them last year to launch their AI school online, which I thought was great as well. But when I went into those conversations trying to craft together what their go-to-market strategy was for launching this product, which was meant to be a pilot before scaling, there was a very huge gap, right? They were focused on, this is what we want to offer, and that's it, because AI can help us build faster. And they already had a prototype, an MVP that they wanted to launch. But then when I started asking key questions, it was very clear that they did not niche down to the outcome they wanted for their audience. They had a very big audience size, and they did not also niche down to who they were going to start with. I've seen this to be a very, very big problem, because I have 15 years of experience working in GTM strategy, working in marketing, and also product roles. And I've sat at the intersection of all of this together from an enterprise space and also startup space. And I've seen that traditionally, like, it's very normal for you to see those type of things happen, where you have multiple broad audiences. You have your primary and you also have your secondary audience.
Right.
But why that is very different in this case for the founder that I worked with was, they didn't have a huge marketing budget, right? They wanted to bootstrap, and he just had this great idea. He had been testing a lot about AI, and he's like, we want to do this. And so when I started asking some of those questions, I realized that they needed to start from the outcome versus, this is the feature that we're selling to. So what is the outcome the end user gets to experience at the end of the day? So an example for this outcome could be, we want XYZ audience to be able to develop products at the end of taking our courses, which means that those products could actually serve as testimonials for anyone else that wants to come back on the platform. And they didn't have that. They focused too much on these are the features that we are offering. And I've seen this very well because traditionally, like it would work. But in this case, if there are 1,000 products being launched on Product Hunt every day and you're competing with that much, you are not going to get, you will not get one customer. Like one user will not find you attractive because there's a key piece Anuja has mentioned around messaging. That messaging is disconnected. You are not speaking to what the experience and their outcome is going to be. The second part for me that I've also seen, and I built this as part of the GTM framework, is that if you do not target your audience where they are, you don't have a positioning strategy. So
Right.
your position and strategy really comes down to where are your audience really talking about their pain points. That pain point is what you really use to build your products. But ultimately, when you want to design your go-to-market strategy, you need to design it from a sense of if my audience are already speaking about this on Reddit, it means that their pain points are already public. I can go to them on Reddit and say that this is how I solved your problem with this particular tool, and this is the outcome it gives you that no one else can give you today. And what we've also seen a lot is that a lot of tools, especially around SEO, are underrated. Reddit, SEO, Google searches. There's so many of them that exist today that are well underrated because the conversations are being had every day there. It could also be Slack, it could be a WhatsApp group, it could be Discord. But those small niches of places where conversations are taking place is where your demand generation can actually start from
Right.
without having to spend so much money. And then I will touch on one more before I pass over to Anuja. And I think this piece is more important because this helps us to think about when you are building an AI product and you know you're trying to solve in Anuja's client's case, for example, they must have had multiple metrics. They had a lot of metrics that they were chasing. But when you think about building with an AI product, do not chase the metrics. Chase the experience you are actually developing for, because the experience is what determines how many users would actually come back. And that is your retention data. That is the data and the signal that you're looking for
Right.
ultimately. So in the case of my clients, I ensured that they were able to design from the experience, and that was how we were able to tie together one real metrics instead of chasing the usual signups, page downloads, and all the other metrics that you typically have with the digital products. But I think this is also very important because when you design it from that, it's an end-to-end flow from a product standpoint, and you know that your average user would be able to walk through this, and that means success. It's not because someone clicked on the website or the landing page. Those don't really mean anything when it comes to an AI product because the next AI product is also getting similar data, right? But the signal you want is the end to end, and that's where that really comes from. But I think all of this, as part of how I've built my framework, has helped my clients. And I've also seen it help other clients as well, in a sense that if you don't follow a cadence in how you want to drive your go to market and also connect it with the marketing piece that Anuja is talking about, then you're going to be struggling. You're going to be struggling to get your clients,
Right.
your first users. And I would also like Anuja to kind of touch on some of these aspects of the framework and how it relates to marketing in our own experience and also with her clients.
Yeah, thanks for that. And I really enjoyed listening to, like how you kind of like built it up with your client, because I think treating GTM and marketing in silos sort of like builds that gap that is kind of like costing your pipeline. So what I've seen happen is like, okay, you are two siloed teams that have like two siloed assumption about like who your ICP is, what is your value prop, and what you're trying to communicate. And a lot of the times what that would result into is a very uh, you generated as a marketing team, you'll end up generating a lot of leads, but that doesn't really translate anything into your pipeline, right? So to your point, it's not about vanity metrics. It's not about your top of the funnel where you're just thinking about, okay, awareness, and it's totally fine to have those goals, with demand gen. You want to create that buzz, that awareness, but ultimately for all of that to translate into your revenue and your pipeline, there has to be a connection between your GTM and your marketing, right? So that they are kind of like working with each other, and the campaigns that marketing ends up building, are aligned with the ICP, that the GTM strategist, for example, or even if you're a founder and you're doing all of this yourself, you're bootstrapping and you have a small team, right? So that one resource who's working on it is aligned, and they understand that, okay, this is what my GTM strategy is. This is who I'm trying to reach. This is how I'm going to reach. This is going to be my messaging. And when I think about messaging, the way I want to like think about it is I always think of it in a mental model. So think of it like this. You are building an AI product. You have identified your market. Like who's your target audience, and now your goal is to really reach them and sort of like communicate to them in a way that they feel seen, like they are the protagonist of the story that you are building. And that's what I think, if we are able to nail that, I would say that's a winner. And I would want to like tie back to what you were saying earlier about the niche communities. I think they are great, particularly Reddit, and in my experience Quora has been great too, from that perspective, where you can actually just go and learn like what your target audience is talking about, what are their pain points, the outcomes that they are trying to reach. And that becomes like a baseline for your messaging. So for example, think of messaging like you want to build like three pillars. So you have a product that can help solve them achieve operational efficiency, achieve be more affordable, so cost efficiency, save them time. So let's say that's what the product can help them do, and that's the benefit that your customer really, really would aspire to have. And so that becomes your messaging pillar, right? And then from there on, you kind of like start building onto the other assets or other pillars within your marketing, whether it is demand, content. So that's how I'd like to think of it, in a mental model where you start with the customer insight. That customer insight flows into your messaging, and that messaging, rooted in your positioning, flows into your content strategy. And when you run your campaigns, I think campaigns are a great feedback loop, because like what is landing and what is not landing, and that sort of like flows back into your GTM. So the way I look at this process, of having a connected GTM and marketing strategy, is really in that loop, where it is always customer led and not product led. That's how I like to think about it.
Yeah, I think that's also very interesting because for a lot of digital products, like you said, it's very important to keep going back to the customer. And I like that marketing always ensures that is always like the forefront of every conversation that a business is running. I've seen a lot of founders do it the other way around, where they focus so much on the products, what the product has to offer, instead of thinking about what does my customer need?
Yeah.
What is my customer sending to me? And this is also where it ties back to that initial signal and the metrics I was relating back to. Because if you don't do your customer insights early on, there would be some initial data that your customer would be able to give you through the product. When they don't experience it, if they fall through in the process, they don't execute the original outcome, then it means that you need to go back to your drawing board and ask yourself, am I designing an experience that is worth it for this specific user?
Right.
Because we've also seen a lot of digital products go into the markets, be launched, because again, AI makes it super fast. use Lovable, Claude, any of these tools to actually launch your products within a day. I'm saying a day because I'm assuming that you are doing some ideation in that process, but you don't have to do ideation these days. You just have to launch your products. And so there's no initial testing. But then when you walk backwards from what you were saying, you actually start realizing that at the forefront of this, the customer always has to be a part of that conversation. So either you're looking at the data, the experience that they're going through, or what they're telling you to change, right?
Right.
It might not be about the features. It might not be about the features. It might just generally be, is this a problem worth solving?
Right.
And we've seen a lot of founders, like most founders are very bullish when it comes to the products they build because they assume that that product is as relevant to the target audience they're building it for. But then this is where you keep coming back to your GTM because you come back to what was your problem statement? What were you trying to solve for that particular user? If the user is saying this is not a problem worth solving for, then you need to start looking at something else entirely. And I don't like to get to this aspect because I think a lot of founders get very emotional when they think about it. And again, failure is not really failure, in my opinion. Failure is a lot of data and insights that you can actually use to build and gain traction to scale whatever type of product you have. But this is also very important in what you said as well, that they've always been treated separately. And I think it is some of the downsides of lack of resources in some cases, or some businesses just wanted to operate that way. In my 15 years, I've actually seen both, where GTM and also marketing were together. And from a Fortune 500 scale, I've actually seen them be completely separate because
Right.
you have GTM being operated by consultants, sometimes external parties, and then you have marketing just focusing on the actual execution. So they don't have as much of a say
Right.
into the entire conversation from the ideation stage. But what I would advise as well as part of this conversation is to avoid some of the downsides that Anuja and I have actually talked about. It is very important to integrate GTM and marketing together from day one when you start thinking about your products before you launch, right? Because that piece would actually help you to solve some of the downsides that you might see within your funnel. The other part is a lot of the GTM findings will drive a lot of the marketing decisions, and that's why they need to be talking regularly. So they shouldn't be separated. The other piece is what Anuja mentioned, the messaging is very, very important, right? So if you craft the messaging on both parties and they agree, then it's very, very easy that your actual audience is being targeted with the messaging you have. And then the final piece that I'm just going to say here is when you use data, you use it as you don't make assumptions when you have data. You actually use data to make informed decisions and pivot where possible. So this is how you can use data to decide on, are we designing the right experience as a whole? Like, what is the checkout rate, for example, is not a question. It's more of, did they finish or did they complete the full outcome? Because that's more important than did they check out, because they checked out but they might not return, which means that your retention would be very low, but you want your
Right.
retention to be very high because that means that your audience will stick to your product and they will continue to use it because you are solving the actual problem that they are stating for yourself. But I'm just going to pass it back to Anuja as well to just touch on some of this and how you can avoid some of the challenges that we've talked about with separating GTM and also marketing for AI products.
So I think I would go back to kind of like reiterating the loop or the mental model that I was talking about. And what it could look like in practice, is you have all this data that you're sitting on, right? So let's say if you have you've done your product demos, you have your customer support logs, or you've been social listening. I think like I've been a social media manager earlier on in my career, and I can tell you like that's one of the most powerful ways to kind of like get a pulse on what your industry, what's happening in your industry, and also just what the customer is saying, not only about you but also about your competitor, right? That would give you a lot of insight into what they are disillusioned with, what they are really enjoying, what is the outcome that they are trying to drive. And all of that just ties back to basically listening to your customer actively wherever they are and meeting them wherever they are. So I think I would start from there. And all that data that you're sitting on within your CRM, your customer logs, or your online communities, today AI makes it like so much more easier to synthesize that, cluster the pain points, cluster the benefits that they are looking for. So you can just throw all of that into Claude or Chat GPT or Gemini, whatever that your team uses or you're using, and just have it synthesize that data, right? That becomes like the foundation for your messaging, right? And then start from there. That's what I would say. Start from there, build your pillars from there. And loop in, like, if you are a solo marketer in a small early stage startup, loop in your founder to kind of like align on that GTM that they had initially proposed. Or if you're doing it all by yourself, then you want to go back and kind of like look at it, and say, like, hey, does this fit my market category? Does this fit my ICP? And not only just the ICP, does this really fit that one persona that I'm solving this problem for? So I think that's where it should start. That's your foundational level. And then just going back every time you build something and you've executed a campaign, whether it is ads or you've tested through a landing page, you sort of like want to capture that and just go back and see if you are seeing that alignment happening between the GTM and the marketing space. So I think that's something that I would touch upon. And to avoid, I think it all just again, this is organizational, depending on like how big the organization is and the kind of resources that you have. But to really avoid that silo, I think it all comes back to clear communication. That's the very basic of any function that business functions. So really just aligning with your founders, really just aligning with your stakeholders. I think that's the best way to kind of like avoid that silo.
Thank you so much, Anuja. I really liked the last point that you made around silo, not working alone. I've seen this from an enterprise standpoint where when an organization gets very big,
Right.
there's that disconnect and everyone works silos. They're solving similar problems, but they're not talking to each other. And I think there is more risk for startups than enterprise when it comes to that, because I
Right.
think, again, enterprise might be able to spend money to kind of solve the problem, but when it comes to startups, you cannot afford to do that. So just
Right.
having
And
that
you're
in the
also
back of your
working
mind.
at a much, sorry, yeah, sorry, there was a lag, but I think like you're also working at a much faster pace, right?
Yes.
If you're a
Yeah.
startup, you are like, you are working at a much faster pace than an enterprise company, and your budgets are much tighter too. So, to your point, you don't have the luxury to kind of like spend the way an enterprise could, right? So and I agree, like in my career, like working particularly with like large companies, there's the silos can be like much bigger because there are like so many departments. But I think that's something that even if you are a bootstrapping founder who has a small team, is something to watch for, because there could be a disconnect between what you have uh, you know built and what you are actually communicating. And a lot of the times this could just live in your PowerPoints and your documents or whatever, but like it's really just like getting the team together. And I would just go back to that clear communication point of view, to communicate and sort of like refer back to where your product journey really starts. And I think I would want to leave this conversation on one note, that GTM and marketing sort of like have shared objectives, because you want to find, acquire, and retain your customers at the end of the day.
Yeah. Yeah, that's very important because the goal is revenue, and retention. Those are two things that I tell my clients, right? You want to also engage with them because engagement also drives retention, but the goal has to be you want to drive up your numbers but also retain your numbers, and that is very important for your marketing funnel but also for your revenues as a whole, because you are not deploying resources just because you can create an AI product, but there's also time that is also invested when it comes to like creating all of this type of AI products. I know we're on time, but we wanted to see if anyone had questions for Anuja or myself on this topic around GTM and marketing for AI products. How do you go to markets? Are you a founder? Do you have any questions for us? Or if you are in an enterprise and you are facing some of these challenges that we have discussed today, we would be happy to answer any questions that you have. Yeah, I don't want to go over time, and I want to be very respectful of people's time because we really appreciate people, everyone that joined this call. It's our first live, and we're super excited because we have more content. We have more content around this, and we have both been writing as well. So if you have not subscribed to Anuja's page, it is AI. Anuja, do you want to drop a link
Sure.
in the chat for everyone? And then mine is Unusual Strategist. As we continue this conversation, perfect. Just going to drop my link as well. And we also wrote a publication together. So that could also be another starting point for you to just continue this conversation with us if you have any comments after this session. Anuja, did you have any final thoughts before we round up if we don't have any questions?
Yeah, I think that was really my final thought around being able to kind of have uh, that connection and not being in silos, because like you said, ultimately the goal is retention and revenue. We want to see that now those leads convert into an actual pipeline, and for the translation to happen, there has to be a more connected conversations between founders or whoever is responsible for bringing the product to market and then communicating its value.
Yeah, that's very important. Very, very important. Thank you so much. We have a few notes from everyone. Thank you so much, Joy. Thank you so much, Tammy. I'm just going to drop the link to our post so you can actually read it, and drop a comment if you have additional questions for the two of us. But thank you so much for joining us. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.
Bye.